One of the most striking features of the climate change debate is that it's no longer a debate. Climate scientists around the world agree that climate change is very real, the Earth is warming up, and we are the cause. And yet, while there is consensus even among the most reserved climate scientists, a portion of the public persistently disagrees. A recent survey conducted by Pew Research Center found that roughly 54% of Americans describe climate change as a major threat to the country's well-being. Climate scientists are racking their brains in an attempt to find out why. Yale law professor Dan Kahan has done extensive research which reveals how our deep-rooted cultural dispositions might actually interfere with our perceptions of reality. His research plays a significant role in answering the main question of this video. Why? Why do we resist the notion of climate change? In 2010, Kahan led a study called Cultural Cognition of Scientific Consensus, which found that individuals tend to weigh evidence and credit experts differently based on cultural considerations. Psychological mechanisms allow individuals to selectively credit or dismiss evidence and experts depending on whether the views presented match the dominant views of their group. There's an interdependence between people's prior beliefs about risk and their exposure to and understanding of new information. People are motivated to search out information in a biased way. They look more for information that is consistent with their views than for information that is going to challenge and potentially refute their views. Kahan's study was administered online to 1,500 U.S. adults. Preliminary analyses wanted to determine if the public thought there was a scientific consensus regarding climate change and if there was a scientific consensus regarding human activity as the cause. A majority, 55% of the subjects, reported their opinion that most scientists agree that global temperatures are rising. 12% believed most scientists do not find that global temperatures are rising, and 33% believe that scientists are divided on the subject. On whether or not human activity is the cause, 45% believed scientists agree that human activity is the cause, 15% believed that scientists do not think human activity is the cause, and 40% believed scientists are divided on the topic. The public is generally not in a position to investigate the data for themselves or even read a scientific paper full of unfamiliar acronyms, plots, and equations. Instead, they turn to experts for assistance. Oftentimes, in determining who is credible and who isn't, individuals will trust those who share similar worldviews and personal values. They tend to seek information congenial to their cultural predispositions. For Kahan's first experiment, the subjects read the biographical information of an expert scientist. They had to decide whether he was credible, having earned a PhD from an elite university and now serving as a faculty member of another elite university. Those who listed themselves as hierarchical, believing in stratified social roles, generally conservatives, were more likely to find the expert scientist credible, while those who listed themselves as communitarian, expecting individuals to secure their own well-being, generally liberals, were more likely to find the expert scientist not credible. These fictional individuals were identified as credible or not based on their biographies only. However, a second experiment showed the subjects not only the resume of the expert scientist, but his position as well. Half the subjects were shown evidence that the expert believed in climate change, placing us at a high risk, while the other half of the subjects were shown evidence that the expert did not believe in climate change, placing us at a low risk. The position taken by the expert scientist dramatically affected the responses of the subjects. When the expert scientist supported a high-risk position, 23% of the hierarchs and 88% of the communitarians found him credible. In contrast, when the expert scientist supported a low-risk position, 86% of the hierarchs and 47% of the communitarians found him credible. Whether the expert scientist was considered credible was highly associated with whether he took the position dominant in the subject's cultural group. According to Kahan, the subjects have dispositions that are connected to their values that then will affect how they make sense of information. Here's the percentage of subjects who found the author credible, depending on whether he supported a high-risk or low-risk position with regard to the issue of climate change. At the end of the day, the conclusion is simple. We're human, and this leads us to take the path of least resistance. We choose to believe in what those around us believe. So it's not that people are not sufficiently rational. They are too rational. They're too good at extracting from the information you're giving them, which sends the message that tells them what position they should take, given the kind of person they are. Moving forward, Kahan's study shows that scientific consensus alone will not sway the public. The public will remain polarized, despite efforts to increase trust in scientists or simply awareness of scientific research. Instead, the key is to use science communication strategies which increase the likelihood that the public will find climate change threatening. In another study, Kahan analyzed 2 techniques of science communication that may help break the connection between cultural predispositions and the evaluation of information. The first technique is to frame the information in a manner that doesn't threaten people's values. In this study, Kahan and his colleagues asked participants to once again assess the credibility of climate change. But before doing so, the subjects had to read an article. One article was a study suggesting that carbon dissipates from the atmosphere much slower than scientists had previously thought. As a result, if we stopped producing carbon today, there would still be catastrophic effects: rising sea levels, hurricanes, drought, etc. Another article, shown to a different group, gave information on geoengineering or nuclear power, potential technological advances that may help reduce the effects of climate change. A final control group read an unrelated article on traffic lights. Logically, all of these articles had nothing to do with whether or not climate change is valid. But psychologically, these articles did determine the meaning that people attached to the evidence of climate change. In all cases, the hierarchs were less likely than the communitarians to say that climate change is valid, but the gap was 29% smaller among the group that was first exposed to geoengineering than the group that was exposed to regulating carbon. The evidence of whether there is a problem doesn't depend on what you're going to do about it, according to Kahan, but psychologically, it can make a difference. People tend to resist scientific evidence that may lead to restrictions on their personal activities, or evidence that threatens them as individuals. But if they are presented with information in a way that upholds their identities, they react with an open mind. The second technique is to ensure that climate change is vouched for by a diverse set of experts. If a particular group is able to identify with that expert, then that group will be more open-minded in addressing the study. This will help reduce the initial polarization between hierarchs and communitarians. Kahan argues that science needs better marketing. It needs to combine climate change with meanings that are affirming rather than threatening to people. When groups can identify with the expert or are presented with possible solutions to climate change, the individuals in that group will stop attaching the issues to identity. According to Kahan, in order to move forward, Science communication needs to change the narrative. It needs to mitigate the connection between climate change and the individual. In order for there to be a public consensus on climate change, it has to be presented in a less threatening manner. This doesn't mean that science communication has to avoid the nasty truth about climate change in order to finally reach a public consensus. Instead, it has to spin climate change in a positive way, a way that is less threatening to the individual. Science communication has to focus the public's attention on things that so many individuals value, like efficiency, not being wasteful, innovation, and moving forward. Only then will the public reach a consensus where there is currently only polarization. Thanks for watching.